Hi there, Dan Scott here. I'm going to show you how I created this painting of my daughter, Elora, using oils on a gesso board. It's titled Elora With Christmas Lights. It's based on this photo that my wife Chantel took just before Christmas in 2023. We were showing Elora some of the Christmas lights and decorations that people had up in the local neighbourhood. Elora was absolutely captivated, and I think this photo sums that up nicely. The first thing I did was carefully draw Elora and the other key shapes and objects. I didn't film this, but you can see how the drawing turned out here. I don't always go this detailed, usually I just do a loose sketch. But because this is a more complex subject, I spent a little bit more time on the drawing. I also have less room for making any mistakes, given it's my own daughter. Any mistakes will clearly stand out, and if I for some reason don't notice them, my wife surely will. With the drawing in place, I get to work on the background. My strategy is to make the background really dark and ambiguous so that the highlights can really come to life later. Here I'm using a wash of Ultramarine Blue. I also add in Viridian Green for the left-hand side to suggest grass. I use much warmer colours for the foreground. This is basically a mix of alizarin crimson, transparent red oxide, and a touch of cadmium orange. The actual colours don't matter all that much at the moment. I'm focusing mostly on the overall theme and temperature and making sure the colours are dark enough in value. I can always adjust the colours later if I need to. Notice how I'm working around Elora. I'll paint her in later once I'm happy with the background. This way I can make more informed decisions and get the colours right where they matter most. Here I'm using a paper towel to gently blend and soften these background colours. As I do this, the paper towel also lifts some of the paint from the surface, which helps avoid any excess paint building up. I find that the more the paint builds up, the less responsive my strokes become, so I like to keep the paint thin and responsive in these early stages. I also use paper towel to apply some darker colours in a broad and general manner. It's quite an effective tool for background areas like this, where you need to quickly cover the surface in colour and you don't care that much about the details. I go back to a brush and continue trying to get the background colours dark enough. The translucency of the oil paints is working against me here, so I need to build up a few layers of paint to get the colours really dark enough. This painting just won't work if there's not enough contrast, so it's important that I get this right before I continue. As you can see, I'm trying to work my way around the Christmas lights, but looking back on it, this was a mistake. It would have been much more efficient to simply paint over this area with the dark background colours and then scumble the Christmas light colours over the top. It's too tedious to try and paint around them. For the sky, I take advantage of the dark colour that's already in place. With just a few simple strokes of blue, I can carve out the clouds and the outline of the house. I roughly map out the Christmas lights with restrained colours. This is so I can get a feel for what the colours look like together before I really commit in that direction. Instead of vivid red, yellow and green, I'm using fairly weak and timid versions of those colours. I use a palette knife briefly here to rough things up and to apply a few lighter colours. I'm guided almost entirely by intuition here. I couldn't give you a firm reason as to why I picked up a palette knife for this, other than it just felt like the right thing to do. Often in these early stages of a painting, I try not to get lost in calculated thought. I prefer to just follow my gut feelings and see where that takes me. I'll use more calculated thought later in the painting when I'm refining things and cleaning everything up. I go back to the brush and add a few strokes of lighter colours. This is to suggest light illuminating from the Christmas lights and scattering out across the ground in a broken fashion. Again, this is all just me exploring the subject and setting the foundation of the painting. I intend to clean all this up later once the pieces are in place. I often like to think of it like I'm a sculptor. I start with a block of clay, then I work it into something that broadly resembles the subject, then I chip away and refine it until I have the finished piece. I struggled a fair bit with that gingerbread man at the back. The main challenge was making it appear realistic, yet also part of the background. If I did too much, it would command too much attention and wouldn't fit in with the rest of the background. If I didn't do enough, it wouldn't look like a gingerbread man, but rather some vague, creepy figure waiting at the back, and I surely didn't want that. So I did a lot of back and forth throughout this painting to get it right. I'd try a few colours and shapes, and if it doesn't work, I'd scrape it down and try again. I don't recommend you paint like this, as it's not efficient or enjoyable, but sometimes it's necessary. So with the background in place, I can start painting Elora. The first thing I do is roughly map out the dark shapes. This is an easy place to start. The light shapes will require a bit more care and finesse. My goal is for the darks to gently melt in with the surroundings. This will create a subtle link between Elora and the background, and it will help make it look like a cohesive painting rather than me just slotting Elora into a Christmas scene. Then, once I have the dark shapes in place, I'll use the light shapes and highlights to make her distinct and to draw attention to her as the focal point. I also want to create a theme of thin and vague darks against thick and intricate lights, so I'm keeping my brushwork flat and simple for these dark areas. I'm not giving much attention to the contours and forms. I'm just blocking in the basic shapes with dark colours. That's it. Time to move on to the light shapes. I need to be a bit more careful here as mistakes will stand out much more so than with the dark shapes. My strategy is to block in the basic colours as accurately as I can whilst ignoring any highlights or rich accents. The idea is to end up with a no frills version of Elora. Then I'll go over and add the highlights, accents and intricate details. One thing I'm paying close attention to is the line that separates light and shadow. This is called the Terminator line, and getting it right will convey a lot of information and realism. If I get it wrong though, the painting just won't read well. With painting in general, it's always good to know what you can get away with. Things like light and shadow are governed by universal laws, and it's not easy to get away with bending them. With other aspects of painting like brushwork and colour saturation, you can be a bit more flexible. The hands are a little tedious. For this blocking in stage, I just focus on painting the basic abstract shapes and colours and the broad gesture. I try not to get lost in the details. As soon as I find myself trying to paint the individual fingers, I pull myself back to the abstract shapes. I go back over the Christmas lights with slightly stronger colours. I'm still not fully committing here, I'm just gradually working my way up. If I go too light with these colours, it's hard to bring it back down. It's easier to start with conservative colours and then get lighter and richer from there until it all clicks into place. Now I do a bit of work on the Christmas lights hanging from the fence. I'm just trying to get the positioning right first. Once I'm happy with that, I can use stronger colours. These lights are a bit tricky in the sense they are fairly weak compared to the other lights, so I need to make these colours strong enough so that they appear as light sources, yet weak in relation to the other lights. It's a bit of a careful balance. I use a palette knife a bit here to apply clean dabs of colour. The palette knife also keeps things a bit rough and broken, which makes it appear like part of the background. With the brush, I might be tempted to make things too refined and detailed. All the basic pieces are in place now. The rest of the painting process is about refining the pieces and making them work together as a whole. I go over the shadows on Elora with darker colours. This will help the colours stand out just a bit more. At the moment, the shadows are a bit timid and weak. Elora's orange dress is a bit tricky. Look at all the contours, shadows and highlights. It also has a bit of a silky finish that I need to convey through the painting. I already have a good foundation in place. The main things to add are the highlights, light midtones and a few dark accents. The highlights should be crisp but not too strong. This will help give the dress that silky finish. As I paint, I'm constantly thinking about the contours and how the dress is folding and flowing down. I use my brush to explore these ideas as I go. I do a bit of work on the skin tones. The idea is for her skin to appear soft and youthful. I mostly use light and weak oranges and yellows for this. There are also a few areas where the colours get darker and richer. Notice around her ears and neck. I add more Cadmium Orange and Alizarin Crimson for these areas. The key is to add these details without overpowering the softer surrounding colours. I'm also paying close attention to how hard or soft the edges are. On Elora's neck, there's a soft transition from light to dark, but around her ears, the edges are much harder. Getting these edges right is important for conveying a sense of form and structure. Soft edges tend to convey rounded forms and gentle transitions, whilst hard edges tend to convey rigid forms and more abrupt transitions. I add more detail to the hair so that it doesn't appear so flat and two-dimensional. For these light colours, I'm using warm and slightly restrained yellows. It's basically a mix of Cadmium Yellow Deep, Titanium White, and a touch of transparent Red Oxide. I also experiment with Yellow Ochre and Titanium White. I paint in the pale green lights in the background. This is basically a mix of Viridian Green and Titanium White. I keep my brushwork fairly relaxed and broken so that it looks like part of the background and doesn't command too much attention. I also gently scumble some pale greens around the surroundings to suggest the soft illumination from these lights. Doing this also helps define and carve out the gingerbread man. I go around with my finger here to apply some lighter colours. I pick up a very small amount of paint on my finger and gently rub the colour into the dry surface. What I'm trying to convey is the soft illumination of the Christmas lights. I go over the Christmas lights one final time to make the colours really pop. I also use a few distinct dots here to suggest the individual lights. I do some finishing touches to Elora's hair. I add a few warmer and richer strokes at the back. This is basically Cadmium Yellow Deep straight from the tube. At the front, I suggest a few strands of hair flowing down over Elora's face. I use a bit of Naples Yellow plus Titanium White for this. I need to be particularly careful with these highlights as they could easily overpower the surroundings. I also add a few more flickering highlights on the dress. That's it for this painting. I sign it complete in the bottom left hand corner using a small round brush and alizarin crimson. Here's the finished painting next to the reference photo. This was a hard one, but I'm happy with how it turned out. I see my daughter in it, which is the most important thing. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Also, make sure you subscribe to my newsletter. That's where I share most of my insights and painting tips. I'll leave a link in the description. Happy painting, and I'll see you in the next one.